Across the immeasurable lattice of realities, where universes drift like sparks cast from a divine forge, something trembled. It was not sound, nor motion, nor any mortal notion of change. It was a violation of equilibrium, a distortion so profound that even the higher laws recoiled from its touch. Within that boundless expanse, where the living tribunal presided as arbiter of all cosmic order, a ripple shivered across the infinite tapestry of existence. It was subtle, barely a whisper against the roaring ocean of multiverses, yet the tribunal perceived it instantly, as sharply as a blade-piercing divine flesh. For ages uncounted, he had watched over creation with an eye both perfect and merciless. Worlds lived and died. Stars bloomed and collapsed. Civilizations ascended into brilliance only to crumble into dust. All of it was expected, contained, balanced according to laws older than eternity itself. But this wound he now sensed, was something older than corruption and deeper than chaos. It was a hunger, a devouring maw stretching across the membrane of reality, one that did not merely warp the rules, but consume the very concept of order. The tribunal turned his gaze toward the source. What he beheld was not a universe, but a blight masquerading as one, a place where suffering had become the native tongue, where despair was the air itself, where hope lived only to be broken. It was a realm that screamed in every direction at once, a realm whose very physics were shaped by torment and war, a universe where gods fed on madness, where mortality was crushed between celestial tyrants and cosmic predators, a universe that defied balance not by accident, but by its very design. He saw a galaxy locked in unending war, each star system echoing with the thunder of extinction. He saw a humanity that worshipped a corpse upon a throne of gold, its prayers drowned beneath machinery and fear. He saw the raw psychic ocean that lay beyond the veil, writhing with entities born from agony, feasting on the souls of all who dared to dream. This place was wrong, not diseased, not damaged, wrong. A violation so absolute that no equation of cosmic harmony could account for it. The tribunal shifted his perspective deeper, observing from countless angles at once. He saw entire worlds burn to ash to appease bureaucrats who considered genocide an acceptable precaution. He saw tides of green-skinned beasts laughing as they butchered entire armies, caring nothing for conquest beyond the joy of slaughter. He saw metallic legions rising from tombs older than humanity, marching with cold purpose to reclaim a galaxy that had forgotten them. He saw insectoid leviathans drifting between the stars, consuming biomass on a scale that could starve whole sectors of the cosmos. And above all of it, he saw the warp, an ethereal tempest of terror and delirium, shifting and twisting like a living nightmare, shaping and reshaping reality as it pleased. This universe did not merely lack balance. It rejected it. Where order sought structure, this realm carved chaos. Where harmony sought alignment, this realm birthed contradiction. Where judgment sought clarity, this realm descended into paradox. The living tribunal had presided over universes where destruction eclipsed creation, where gods battled endlessly for dominion, where entropy threatened to swallow entire clusters of realities. None of them compared to this. None had ever demanded his intervention, but this one did. He drifted deeper still, crossing conceptual layers of existence. He saw a future that fractured into branching calamities. In one path, humanity devoured itself beneath the weight of its own faith. In another, alien predators emptied the stars of life. In another still, chaos surged outward like a tidal wave, remaking the galaxy into a fevered reflection of the warp's deranged will. Every possible outcome ended in suffering, Every destiny terminated in ruin. Yet beneath the screams of a trillion fates, there was something else, something faint, fragile, and nearly extinguished. A plea, perhaps not spoken, but felt. A yearning for judgment, or maybe for deliverance. It came not from a single voice, but from the echo of countless souls enduring endless torment. Even in this nightmare of iron and blood, the faint ember of hope flickered, small enough to be devoured yet stubborn enough to persist. The tribunal regarded this ember with an eye that judged whole pantheons. It was not compassion that stirred within him. He knew none. It was not sorrow or pity. It was the simple recognition of imbalance beyond all tolerances. A cosmic scale had tipped so severely that the multiverse itself groaned beneath its weight. Something needed to be done, something decisive, something absolute. He extended his awareness toward the heart of this distorted reality. Threads of crimson light converged upon a single world, wreathed in perpetual storm, its continents a crust of ruined cathedrals, its air choked with incense, industry, and prayer. It was a world whose shadow stretched across the entire galaxy, a world that ruled billions and damned just as many. Terror, cradle and prison of humanity, and upon a throne of impossible machinery, a silent God watched the stars with eyes that had not opened in 10,000 years. The tribunal perceived the emperor of mankind as a blinding shard of psychic might, half dead yet immeasurably potent, a being trapped between divinity and decay. And as the tribunal beheld him, something stirred in the warp. A tremor, a whisper, a shifting of tides that had remained stagnant for millennia. For the first time in the long history of this accursed universe, the warp itself sensed a presence greater than its gods. The tribunal stepped across the boundary of realities, descending toward the Imperium with judgment burning in every facet of his being. And as he crossed into the materium, the universe shuddered again, this time in terror. The moment the living tribunal crossed the last trembling membrane between realms, reality convulsed like a wounded beast. The materium recoiled from his presence, not out of defiance, but from a primal terror buried in its very foundations. Stars flickered in their courses. Astropathic choirs fell into sudden shrieking silence. Warp routes twisted upon themselves and collapsed into dead zones of cold, lightless void. Even the great Astronomicon, that blazing psychic beacon sustaining the Imperium's fragile arteries of travel, dimmed to a wan, sickly glow, as if the Emperor himself beheld a force he had never accounted for. The tribunal took form not as a being of flesh or energy, but as a concept given shape by necessity. To mortals, his presence would have appeared as a trinity of faces: equilibrium, vengeance, necessity, each infinitely distant yet impossibly close, overlapping and shifting like facets of cosmic law. But he did not come for mortals. He came for the fabric of the universe itself, and the universe felt his scrutiny like a blade against bone. Where he walked through the void, space buckled. The emptiness between stars thinned until it resembled fragile glass. The tribunal examined this galaxy not as a visitor, but as an executioner studying the condemned. Around him, unspooled visions of its history, each memory ripped from the continuum and laid bare before his triune gaze. He saw empires rise in brilliance only to drown in their own ambition. He saw the birth of the warp's gods, coalescing from the psychic detritus of suffering species. He saw the war in heaven, when the Necrontyr cast off their mortality and forged bodies that defied decay. He saw the Eldari's golden age rot into decadence. birthing a scream that tore a hole into eternity and unleashed a prince of torment upon all existence. Every revelation deepened the wound he'd sensed beyond the veil. For this universe had not simply endured tragedy, it had crystallized tragedy into its natural law. War was not a failure of diplomacy or morality. War was the engine that drove reality. Lives, civilizations, even gods existed only to feed its eternal cycle. Harmony was impossible. Balance was a myth. This was a place where nightmares were not born from fear, but from inevitability. The Tribunal's gaze shifted to the void surrounding Terra. A fleet of Imperial warships drifted in formation, their armor scarred by battles fought across 1,000 worlds. Each vessel bristled with torpedo bays, macro cannon batteries, and Gothic spires carved with grim warnings of divine wrath. Their machine spirits stirred uneasily as the Tribunal passed. Auspex arrays scrambled, Vox channels crackled with static, and servitors collapsed mid-task as if their souls had been stripped away. The commanders aboard these vessels sensed something approaching, though they could not name it. None dared speak, for their minds struggled to grasp the scale of what pressed against the edges of perception. The Tribunal paused in the void, evaluating not only the Imperium's military might, but the desperation that forged it. Billions of soldiers marched under a banner of faith, each taught from birth that existence was suffering and duty was salvation. To maintain this empire, humanity had chained itself to a cycle of sacrifice so vast that even the gods of the warp feasted endlessly upon its pain. He examined every system of this galaxy-spanning dominion, from its tyrannical bureaucracy to its brutal creed, and found none of it born from malice alone. Instead, he saw fear, ancient, suffocating, and all-consuming, driving an entire civilization to cling to survival through oppression and fire. Fear, he realized, was the catalyst that shaped this universe. And fear, left unchecked, had created horrors that defied equilibrium. He turned his attention deeper still, no longer observing the galaxy, but probing the warp itself. The veil separating realities thinned before him like smoke exposed to a great wind. Tendrils of raw emotion curled around him. Rage, despair, ambition, desire. Each a manifestation of the psychic ocean that underpinned all existence in this realm. The Tribunal felt its tides, felt its hunger, felt the infinite storm that churned with the tormented echoes of unnumbered souls. The warp recognized him, though not as a god nor an intruder, but as something the warp had never encountered, a will it could not manipulate, distort, or consume. The storm hesitated, its currents faltered. It was as if the warp itself drew breath in fear. Through the swirling tides, he saw the shadows of 4 titanic entities lurking at the edges of awareness. Their roars shook the boundaries of perception. Their influence seeped into every thought, every fear, every dream of mortals across the galaxy. They ruled not through right, but through inevitability, their existence a result of the suffering that fed them. Their presence alone ensured the perpetual torment of this universe. In them, the Tribunal found the greatest imbalance of all. Yet he did not confront them, not yet. Balance demanded understanding before judgment, and so he withdrew from the warp, returning to the cold, silent void above Terra, the cradle of mankind's agony. There he felt the Emperor's distant consciousness flicker once more, a faint pulse like a dying star struggling to burn. The Emperor sensed him clearly now, sensed the magnitude of what had entered his domain. Atop the golden throne, where agony and power intertwined, the master of mankind stirred in the slightest tremor of awareness. Across Terra's orbit, Imperial ships scrambled into combat formation. though none knew what they faced. Alarm klaxons howled across adamantium corridors. Choirs of psykers chanted litanies of protection, their voices wavering as the air grew heavy with pressure. The Tribunal allowed their fear to wash over him, not out of cruelty, but to gauge the state of this civilization, clinging to order through tyranny. The Imperium trembled before him, yet it was not his judgment that caused their terror. It was the certainty, buried deep within their souls, that judgment had been overdue for far too long. The tremor that passed through the golden throne was infinitesimal, no more than the quiver of a dying ember struggling against the final breath of wind. Yet for the countless souls attuned to the Emperor's psychic radiance, it thundered through the warp like the tolling of a great cathedral bell. Deep beneath the adamantium crust of terror, where incense choked the air and machinery hummed with tortured devotion, thousands of servitors froze mid-function as a single, overwhelming pulse of pressure rippled outward from the throne. It was not a command. It was not a warning. It was simply awareness. A flicker of the Emperor's staggering consciousness brushing against the edges of reality. For 10,000 years, the master of mankind had remained silent, suspended in a state between life and death, bound to the arcane labyrinth of the throne. His thoughts had folded inward, locked in an eternal war upon the warp, guarding humanity with an effort so immense that even gods might have faltered beneath its weight. But now, something had reached him. Something vast, cold, and impossibly distant. It pressed upon the veil of the materium with a clarity that neither chaos nor mortal prayer had ever produced. It was a presence the Emperor had not foreseen, not created, not battled across his long, bloody campaign to unify humanity. And in that instant of contact, the Emperor understood the truth. A judgment had arrived from beyond all known parameters of existence. Around the throne, the custodians felt the change before the Mechanicus did. Warriors clad in auramite, living embodiments of the Emperor's will, tensed as one, their halberds shimmering with psychic resonance. They exchanged no words. Custodians required none to interpret such a shift. The chamber's atmosphere thickened, as if the air itself cowered beneath an unseen gaze. Vox relays crackled with static across the Imperial Palace. High-ranking psykers dropped to their knees as visions of fractured constellations and burning laws seared the edges of their minds. The Tribunal's descent through orbit grew heavier in their senses, not like the approach of a fleet or demon, but like the manifestation of a concept too immense for the human mind to comprehend. Above terror, the stars dimmed again, swallowing their radiance as though consumed by an invisible tide. Imperial ships adjusted formation, their machine spirits shrieking warnings none had ever catalogued. Entire Vox networks shut down under the unbearable strain of attempting to define something inherently indefinable. It was as though reality refused to articulate the intruder's presence, knowing that description alone might doom the observer. The Emperor felt all of this, not through sight or sound, but through the trembling currents of the warp. Even in his weakened, tormented state, he recognized that this was no demon, no Xenos god, no stray aberration birthed from the psychic miasma. It was something external, something absolute, something that existed beyond the boundaries that even the Eldar's ancient seers could not pierce. And the Emperor understood what such a presence meant. The Imperium he had forged in blood and sacrifice was being weighed, not by mortals, not by chaos, but by an arbiter whose authority eclipsed the stars. Within the throne's labyrinthine networks, servitors resumed their chanting. unaware that the Emperor's mind had turned outward for the first time in millennia. His psychic essence stretched thin across the galaxy, the faintest tremor of golden light pushing against the overwhelming darkness. He sought the intruder not to resist, but to measure, to know, to understand why such a being had come. Far above Terra, the Tribunal slowed his descent. He hovered in the void, observing not the fleets nor the defenses nor the panicked signals flooding across Imperial channels. He focused instead upon the golden thread of power emanating from the planet below, a singular, brilliant anomaly within a universe otherwise drowned in despair. That light, fractured and eroded though it was, held a weight of intention unlike anything else in this realm. It was a will that had shaped an empire, crushed alien dominions, and held back the oceanic madness of the warp through sheer force of existence. The Tribunal regarded this wounded son of consciousness with the curiosity of a judge examining a testimony that defied precedent. He perceived its agony, its purpose, its enduring will. He saw a being that had sacrificed everything, body, freedom, morality, in a desperate gamble to save its species. Yet he also saw the consequences. A galaxy drowning beneath the fanatic devotion and brutal doctrine that had sprung from this sacrifice. Billions suffered daily in the Emperor's name, often without his intention or approval, their torment feeding both the Imperium and the very chaos it sought to fight. A paradox lay at the heart of mankind's so-called salvation, and the Tribunal recognized it instantly. Below, the Emperor felt the Tribunal's scrutiny, a pressure upon his vast psyche. He attempted to rise, not physically, for his body had long ago ceased such functions, but within the warp, where his spirit remained aflame. Golden tendrils of psychic energy reached outward, straining to confront this new presence, to address it, to understand its purpose. But the Tribunal was not of the warp, nor bound by it. The Emperor's power washed over him like a fading tide against an unyielding monolith. Still, the Tribunal acknowledged the attempt. His presence shifted just enough for the Emperor to perceive him clearly, a triune radiance suspended in the void, a trinity of cosmic law, watching with an expression that was not emotion, but conclusion. For a fleeting moment, the Emperor realized the magnitude of what stood before his realm. Not a threat in the traditional sense, nor a savior, nor an enemy, but a force that answered to no gods and bowed to no universe. The Tribunal descended further, passing silently through the layered shields of terror, ignoring every defense, every detection grid, every psychic barrier. Nothing could obstruct him. Nothing dared to try. As he neared the surface, the Emperor's golden light flickered once more, stretching toward him in a final attempt at contact. But the Tribunal had already reached his decision. He would begin his judgment with mankind. The Tribunal descended into Terra's upper atmosphere without sound, without motion, without resistance, as though the world itself parted to allow his passage. The planet's defenses, void shields, orbital arrays, kinetic barriers, registered nothing but the faintest distortion, a ripple slipping through reality as effortlessly as thought. Storm fronts churned beneath him, their thunderheads flashing with the reflection of his triune glow, and the colossal spires of the Imperial Palace rose through the clouds like the broken teeth of an ancient titan. Every structure, every cathedral, every colossal wall built to withstand the fury of armies and gods alike trembled as the Tribunal approached. High above the Eternity Gate, 1,000 custodians tightened their formation, golden armor gleaming under the stormlit sky. Their helms turned toward the disturbance with precision born of millennia. They sensed no warp presence, no psychic signature, no electromagnetic pattern that could be catalogued. Yet their instincts, sharpened to a razor edge through centuries of training and the Emperor's own shaping, screamed that something incomprehensible neared. An instinct alone was enough to push them into silent readiness. Within the palace, the High Lords gathered in emergency convocation, their faces pale beneath the towering banners of the Imperium. Vox transmissions snapped in and out of existence, some carrying the garbled screams of astropaths driven mad by the Tribunal's arrival, others filled with static punctuated by the faint echo of a voice that did not speak, yet resonated through every mind. Their words dissolved into arguments, accusations, fragments of doctrine thrown like weapons as their fear sharpened into desperation. No decree, no protocol, no ancient scripture held guidance for this intrusion. They knew only that something had come to judge them, and that no amount of authority could shield them from judgment. The tribunal floated above the palace, gazing down upon the vast procession grounds paved with the bones of history. His presence radiated outward like a conceptual gravity, bending not space but meaning itself. The air thickened around him, every particle vibrating with the strain of containing his reality. Statues cracked, iron buttresses groaned, the clouds themselves parted, forming a vast circular void that framed his descent like the eye of a storm. When he stepped closer, time seemed to slow, not by his intention, but by the universe's inability to keep pace. Voices dulled, footsteps faltered. The very wind hesitated as though unwilling to brush against him. What he observed in these suspended instants was not the Imperium's might, but its burden. Every soldier beneath him wore devotion like armor, but beneath that devotion he saw the fracture lines of fear. Every shrine radiated reverence, but beneath that reverence lay the rot of fanaticism. Every edict carved into marble spoke of unity, but the echoes beneath carried the weight of oppression. Humanity had endured for 10 millennia, but it had endured through suffering so vast that even the warp feasted endlessly upon its despair. He extended one of his aspects toward the procession grounds, and the custodians felt the pressure of his attention like a mountain settling upon their shoulders. They resisted, not through force, but through will alone, planting their halberds into the stone as a declaration that the Emperor's guardians would not yield even to a cosmic sovereign. Their defiance impressed the tribunal, though it held no bearing on his purpose. They stood between him and the throne, yet he did not need to reach the throne to understand mankind. Its sins and virtues alike were written across the planet itself. A low tremor rolled through the palace as the tribunal reached into the warp-touched memory of terror, peeling back its history layer by layer. He saw the Great Crusade, a march of iron and flame that had united humanity through conquest and vision. He saw the betrayal that shattered it, the war masters fall into corruption, the fires that consume billions as brother warred against brother. He saw the Emperor's final battle against the arch-traitor, the mortal wound that condemned him to the throne. He saw the millennia that followed, each century an age of struggle, stagnation, and unending sacrifice. All of it culminated in the empire that now trembled beneath him. He reached deeper still, past the walls and armor and doctrine, into the very soul of mankind. He felt the weight of their suffering, their endurance, their resolve carved into centuries of torment. He sensed the contradictions that defined them, cruelty wrapped in hope, faith twisted into chains, heroism forged from desperation. Humanity was neither wholly guilty nor wholly innocent. They were a species driven to brutality not by nature, but by a universe that had left them no other means to survive. The tribunal allowed this truth to settle within his judgment. Balance demanded acknowledgement, not blindness. Mankind had become a weapon against its own future, yet mankind had also endured far beyond the fate any other species would have suffered under such conditions. Their torment was both their crime and their testament. Below him, the Emperor's psychic presence stirred again, faint as the glow of a candle in a void without end. The tribunal felt it reach toward him, not in challenge, but in recognition. The contact, though brief, held a depth of understanding rare even among cosmic beings. The Emperor knew that this entity had come to pass verdict, and that humanity's future balanced upon an edge sharper than any blade. The tribunal absorbed the Emperor's silent acknowledgement, and his own response resonated across Terra, like a thought pressed into the fabric of existence. He did not speak, for speech was irrelevant. His presence alone carried the meaning. The judgment begins now. The custodians felt the shift instantly. Their grips tightened, their armor hummed, and a single wordless truth pressed upon their souls. The being before them would not be fought. It would be endured, and its verdict, once given, would reshape all things. The tribunal lifted his gaze from Terra, turning it toward the roiling heavens where the warp churned behind the veil. Humanity had been weighed, its complexities recorded, but the imbalance did not begin with man, nor would it end there. To render true judgment, he would next confront the beings who presided over the galaxy's suffering. And the warp trembled in anticipation. The tribunal ascended from Terra in a motionless drift, rising through the last layers of atmosphere as though gravity itself hesitated to grasp him. Clouds folded away, curling into spirals that broke apart under the strain of his passing. Below, the storm-wreathed planet shrank into a dim sphere of stone and sorrow, its continents hidden under the scars of countless wars. Yet even as he left it behind, the Emperor's fading psychic glow clung to him like a faint whisper, a final, distant echo of a will that refused to die. The tribunal recognized its significance, but he did not turn back. Humanity had been assessed. Their part in the disorder was vast, but they were not its architects. Ahead, reality thinned into a wavering veil, shimmering like heat rising from a desert of broken laws. The warp awaited him beyond that boundary, a realm of unmade thought and unbound emotion, a storm that had shaped this universe since its beginnings. Mortal psykers touched it only at the cost of sanity. Demons roamed it with predatory delight, and the chaos gods ruled it as tyrants forged from the collective souls of suffering species. The tribunal had observed such entities before in distant universes, but none born of anguish on this scale. The warp was not a mirror of life here. It was an ocean of torment fed by every sentient mind, caught in the galaxy's endless misery. As he approached the veil, its fabric recoiled. Threads of raw emotion snapped away from him, quivering as though in fear. The boundary warped, deepening into a whirlpool of swirling colors, crimson, sickly green, shimmering blue, and decadent violet, each hue reflecting the dominions he was about to confront. The warp did not welcome him. It recoiled from the certainty of judgment, yet it could not bar him. No dimension, no god, no metaphysical boundary held authority over the tribunal. He passed through with neither resistance nor sound. Inside, the warp roared. It was not a single roar but countless overlapping voices, an entire galaxy of pain given sound. Screams, laughter, chants, and whispers collided and dissolved in a storm that ignored logic. Shapes without form drifted like phantoms through the shifting void. Castles assembled themselves from fractured memories. Oceans of blood evaporated into skies of fire before reforming as labyrinths of living glass. Time curled upon itself in dizzying spirals. Every heartbeat of this realm was shaped by emotion magnified to infinity. Wrath, despair, ambition, rapture. And within this maelstrom, vast presences stirred. The Chaos Gods had sensed him long before he crossed the veil. Their awareness spread like tides through the warp, converging upon the singular point of order that pierced their domain. Khorne rumbled first, a low, grinding thunder that shook the crimson skies. Nurgle's laughter followed, warm and rotting, like the breath of death wrapped in foul affection. Tzeentch whispered through 1,000 mirrored illusions, each voice contradicting the last, and Slaanesh exhaled a shiver of delight, both welcoming and predatory, sensing an anomaly to unravel. The Tribunal advanced deeper, unaffected by the madness swirling around him. His triune visage glowed with a steady radiance, a fixed point of law in a universe built upon contradiction. The warp twisted itself in frantic shapes to obscure his path. Mountains of bone collapsing into flowers of agony, storms of living eyes that blinked in unison, rivers of memory flowing backward through time. None slowed him. None could. He moved according to the laws that governed all creation, and the warp trembled because it obeyed none. The first god to manifest was Khorne. The air ignited in crimson fury as a colossal iron throne forced itself into existence, built from skulls harvested across millennia. Rivers of blood cascaded from its base, steaming as they struck the shifting ground. Upon the throne towered a figure of muscle, iron, and rage incarnate. Horned helm crackling with power, axe clenched in a grip capable of sundering reality. His mere presence warped the ground, cracking it with fault lines that pulsed like veins. The Tribunal regarded him without emotion. Khorne snarled, the sound ripping through the warp with enough force to shatter continents in the materium. Rage boiled off him in waves that melted the illusions around them into molten streams. "You trespass upon the domain of war," Khorne growled, his voice a chain of thunderous detonations. "No law binds me, no authority judges me. I am the death of empires, the fury of all who bleed. You will leave." The Tribunal did not speak. Words were unnecessary. His silence sharpened Khorne's, rage into something almost fragile, a raw truth exposed. The god of slaughter recognized a being he could neither intimidate nor defeat. Before the moment could deepen, the warp rippled again. A garden bloomed behind Khorne's throne, swollen vines, rotting leaves, and blossoms dripping with pus. The air soured with sweetness and decay as Nurgle's corpulent presence swelled into being. His laughter rolled like the bubbling of vast cauldrons. Flies blotted out the sky, singing their buzzing hymns of entropy. "Ah, such a curious visitor," Nurgle crooned, folds of decaying flesh trembling with delight. "Come to embrace the inevitability of decay. Come to join my garden. All things rot. All things return to me." The Tribunal neither recoiled nor acknowledged the gesture. His presence remained unwavering, untouched. A shiver of shifting colours wound through the sky, and suddenly Tzeentch was everywhere. Mirrors forming from empty air, fractal towers rising and dissolving, 1,000 versions of the same sorcerous avian form, speaking contradictory truths. His laughter was wind and flame, and the turning of pages in forbidden tomes. "And what judgment do you think you can impose here?" Tzeentch whispered. "This realm is change. This realm is possibility. You cannot weigh that which has no fixed shape." The Tribunal's gaze pierced through every illusion at once, and for the first time, The changer of ways hesitated. Last came a tremor of exquisite agony. The air folded like silk drenched in shadow, and Slaanesh manifested in a silhouette of impossible beauty and torment, each movement accompanied by a chorus of sighs. Their voice caressed the tribunal like a blade sheathed in velvet. "You do not belong here," Slaanesh purred, "but you are fascinating. Stay. Let us unmake you, one sensation at a time." The tribunal stood alone before four gods who embodied the suffering of an entire galaxy. They surrounded him, each radiating power enough to drown civilizations in madness. Yet none dared strike. None dared test the immovable law standing within their dominion. For the tribunal was not a threat. He was a verdict. And as the warp writhed around him, one truth settled upon the domain of gods like an executioner's shadow. Their judgment had come. The tribunal turned first toward the crimson horizon, where Khorne's throne loomed like a mountain forged from the skulls of civilizations. The warp around it pulsed with fury, each beat a thunderous echo of slaughter committed across uncounted millennia. As he advanced, the very ground reshaped itself, forming plains of cracked brass and rivers of boiling blood that frothed with the psychic residue of battles never forgotten. Each drop carried the memory of a death. Every scream, every fracture of bone, every extinguished life swirling in a vast ocean of rage. It was a history carved into suffering, and the tribunal absorbed its meaning in silence. Khorne rose from his throne, the metal groaning under the weight of his cosmic form. His armor burned with the glow of a dying sun. His axe, forged from the annihilation of worlds, dripped with ethereal gore. His eyes, twin furnaces of hatred, locked upon the intruder who dared approach him without blade or challenge. When he spoke, the warp splintered into storms. "You know nothing of judgment," Khorne roared. "War is the only truth. Blood is the only law. Every mortal, every god, every creature learns this through death." The tribunal did not retreat. His presence pressed forward, and Khorne felt something unfamiliar tightening around him. Inevitability. It was not fear, not hesitation. It was the weight of a cosmic principle descending upon his dominion. The god of war snarled, leaping from his throne with the force of a collapsing star. His steps cracked the brass plains, sending fissures of molten rage spiraling in every direction. The tribunal observed as Khorne summoned visions from the warp to display the magnitude of his influence. 1,000,000 battlefields materialized around them, each layered upon the next like overlapping panes of stained glass, depicting endless carnage. Armies clashed beneath skies of fire. Titans strode through ruins, their plasma cannons lighting the darkness with apocalyptic radiance. Orc hordes bellowed with laughter as they tore through human ranks. Astartes waged war in solemn fury, each kill echoing across Khorne's dominion with the resonance of a sacred vow fulfilled. The Tyranids devoured worlds, their claws singing hymns of consumption, and through every scene ran the same crimson thread, a river of violence that flowed into the warp, feeding the throne before which Khorne now stood. "This is my domain," Khorne declared. "The truth of existence. Conflict is purity. Weakness is sin. And all who bleed serve me." The tribunal allowed the images to settle. They revealed not only slaughter but purpose born from the mortal struggle to live, to resist, to survive. Yet in Khorne's hands, survival had become corruption. Every act of courage had been twisted into fuel for bloodshed. Every sacrifice had been claimed as tribute. Khorne had become not a force of war, but a tyrant feeding upon the very emotions that once defined mortal valor. He reached further, piercing the memories embedded in the warp. He saw the first spark of Khorne's birth, a primal cry of rage from ancient species driven to war by fear and necessity. He saw that spark swell over millennia, becoming a storm, then a god, then a force so vast that entire galaxies trembled beneath its implications. But the Tribunal also saw the truth Khorne hid. Beneath the armor of fury, beneath the endless roar of conquest, lay an emptiness so profound that it had become indistinguishable from wrath. Khorne did not fight because war was truth. Khorne fought because silence was unbearable. The Tribunal raised a single hand, and the warp froze. Every battlefield stilled mid-motion. Every scream halted. Every sword, axe, claw, and bullet hung suspended in the air, each a perfect representation of the moment Khorne had claimed as sacred. The god of war stiffened, feeling the stasis clamp around him like chains forged from law itself. The Tribunal's three faces turned toward him in unbroken unity. No voice emerged, yet meaning struck Khorne with the weight of a decree. You are in balance. Khorne strained against the immovable grip. His fury surged, cracking the very concept of stillness around him. He hurled his axe, aiming to cleave the Tribunal in half, but the weapon halted inches from its target, frozen in the same grip that held the warp in place. Khorne's roar shook galaxies. The warp churned, desperate to obey him, yet incapable. You judge me, Khorne thundered. You judge war itself. The Tribunal lowered his hand. The stasis dissolved, and the suspended battlefields collapsed into rivers of psychic residue that flooded back into Khorne's throne world. But something had shifted. The roar of the warp grew quieter, its rage momentarily uncertain. Khorne felt it, a single fracture in his dominion. The Tribunal advanced, stepping directly onto the brass plane before the throne. Khorne braced for assault, expecting retribution, annihilation, erasure. But the Tribunal did none of these. Instead, he extended his awareness across the infinite carnage of the war god's realm and revealed what Khorne refused to see. War was no longer a means of survival. It had become the engine of suffering driving the galaxy deeper into ruin. Mortal conflict had once shaped strength, unity, and resilience. Under Khorne's shadow, it had become addiction, a cycle perpetuated for its own sake. Heroes had become butchers. Victories had become sacrifices. Purpose had become obliteration. Khorne's fist clenched, cracking the hilt of his axe. He wished to deny it, to reject this verdict with all the fury at his command. Yet the Tribunal's judgment did not demand agreement. It demanded acknowledgement. For the first time in millennia, Khorne spoke without roaring. What do you intend? The Tribunal's radiance pulsed with finality. To judge you by balance. Khorne's throne shook. The warp itself gasped, and the Crimson Dominion braced for a verdict that no war god had ever imagined possible. The Tribunal left the crimson plains of Khorne's dominion without turning, without granting the war god another moment of acknowledgement. Khorne's roar, equal parts fury and reluctant recognition, echoed behind him, rippling across the warp like a storm forced to yield before a greater force. Yet the Tribunal did not pause. Judgment was not complete. War was but one wound carved into this universe's soul. Another festered deeper, older, and far more insidious. The air thickened as he advanced, shifting from the metallic heat of battle to a humid, choking heaviness that clung to him like damp cloth. The landscape dissolved into a haze of green mists, each cloud pulsing with spores that glistened like dying stars. Rotting vines coiled beneath him, pushing aside the fractured brass as they claimed territory with the steady confidence of decay. The earth softened underfoot, turning into wet soil that breathed with the rhythm of something alive, something vast, patient, and endlessly hungry. Then the smell reached him. It was not simply stench, but an entire philosophy rendered in scent. Sweetness curdled into corruption, life collapsing into death, hope rotting into acceptance. Every breath carried the ghost of 1,000 worlds that had fallen not to violence but to entropy's gentle embrace. And through this dense, festering fog came the sound of laughter, warm, affectionate, almost paternal. It reverberated through the warp, like the bubbling of a colossal cauldron stirred by unseen hands. The Tribunal stepped into the garden of Nurgle. Towering fungi rose around him like cathedral pillars carved from swollen flesh. Trees with bark the color of festering wounds stretched their branches to the sky, releasing motes of rot that danced in the stagnant air. Rivers of thick, glistening sludge wound through the terrain, carrying with them memories of plagues unleashed upon the galaxy. Diseases that scoured continents, poisons that withered hives, afflictions that stripped civilizations to bone and silence. Yet within every river, within every fetid bloom, he sensed a strange echo of nurture. For in Nurgle's realm, decay was not destruction, it was transformation. A shadow loomed ahead, massive and indistinct, shifting with a slow, deliberate ease. The mist parted with a wet sigh to reveal the plague god himself. Nurgle's colossal form towered above the garden, his belly distended and split with jovial generosity, from which swarms of Nurglings tumbled, giggling as they spilled across the ground. His skin, if it could be called skin, was an amalgam of boils, sores, and weeping lesions, each one pulsing with its own foul rhythm. Yet his eyes glowed with a warmth that defied his grotesque exterior. "Ah," Nurgle murmured, his voice as thick as swamp water and as soft as a dying breath. "A visitor unlike any other. Welcome, little judge. Welcome to my garden." The Tribunal faced him without hesitation. The warp itself seemed to lean closer, for the dynamic between them possessed none of the immediate violence of Khorne's confrontation. This was a place where decay reigned not through force but through inevitability, an inevitability the Tribunal had come to evaluate. Nurgle lifted a hand the size of a fortress, dripping with slime that sizzled where it fell. He gestured toward the garden with paternal pride. "Do you see?" he asked gently. "All things return to me. Flesh, hope, sorrow, life itself. Nothing escapes my embrace. I give release from suffering. I give acceptance. My gifts are mercy." As he spoke, the garden responded. Flowers blooming with pustules that burst into clouds of spores, vines twisting into shapes that resembled smiling faces, pools of rot bubbling with contented sighs. The air trembled with the strange harmony of decay, a lullaby composed of endings. The Tribunal extended his perception deeper into the garden, beyond its grotesque surface. He saw mortals succumbing to Nurgle's touch, not with screams of terror, but with sighs of relief. He saw families infected together, clinging to one another in their final moments. He saw warriors laid low by plagues that Nurgle crafted with loving precision. Each illness a work of art intended not to torment, but to unify its victims in shared inevitability. He saw entire planets surrendering to entropy with a peace they had never known in life. Yet beneath this veneer of compassion, the Tribunal detected contradiction. Nurgle offered love, yet his love smothered growth. His mercy bred stagnation. His acceptance extinguished hope. He claimed to alleviate suffering, yet he sustained the very cycle that fed him. Every disease he bestowed, every plague he crafted, ensured that despair would continue to seep into the warp, nourishing his swollen presence. The tribunal showed him this truth. The garden froze as his judgment settled upon it. Every droplet of rot halted mid-fall. Every leaf, every spore, every twitching nurgling paused in absolute stillness. Even the warp's chaotic pulse dimmed, muted beneath the weight of his observation. Nurgle himself stiffened, his jovial expression curdling into something like concern, his laughter fading into silence. "You misunderstand," Nurgle said softly, a tremor running through his bulk. "I do not cause suffering. I heal it. I bring peace where none exists. I comfort those abandoned by hope." The tribunal's gaze pierced through the god's words, unveiling what lay beneath them. He did not deny Nurgle's affection, nor the strange, perverse joy he took in nurturing his creations. But affection twisted by inevitability was no less destructive. Peace purchased through decay was no peace at all. In Nurgle's embrace, life ceased striving. It ceased changing. It ceased living. Nurgle sank slightly, his massive form trembling, as the tribunal's silent verdict tightened around him. For the first time in eons, the plague god felt the weight of something older than despair. "You would deny them my comfort," he whispered, voice thick with grief. "You would take away their final refuge." The tribunal's light pulsed, neither cruel nor gentle, simply resolute. "Your comfort sustains the agony you claim to soothe." The garden shuddered. Spores collapsed into dust. Rivers of rot dried into cracked, brittle beds. The stagnant air thinned into a fragile silence. And Nurgle, god of plague, entropy, and inevitable decay, bowed his head, not in surrender, but in recognition. Judgment had not ended his dominion. Judgment had revealed his truth. And the next truth lay waiting in a labyrinth of shifting lies and impossible futures. The garden of Nurgle receded behind the tribunal like a fading dream, its air thick with decay, its laughter dimming into a distant, hollow echo. The warp, sensing the shift in judgment, recoiled in eddies of psychic turbulence. Its storms churned with deeper agitation, as though the realm itself understood that its next sovereign was far more elusive, far more dangerous, far more intimately entangled with the very concept of cause and consequence. The mist dissolved into shifting colors, azure, amethyst, gold, each hue sliding across the next like living brushstrokes upon a canvas that refused to stay still. Ground and sky inverted. Liquid became solid, then fractured into dust. Time fluttered, compressing into a single instant before expanding into impossible spans. Every perception twisted under the influence of an intelligence that thrived on contradiction. The tribunal stepped forward, and each step carried him through countless overlapping realities. In one, he walked across a floor of crystalline feathers. In another, across stairways spiraling into infinity. In another, across a void punctured by luminous symbols that rearranged themselves into vibrating truths. Yet he was not lost. His presence cut through the labyrinth, each direction dissolving before him like illusions unable to withstand clarity. Then the labyrinth formed in earnest. Vast towers coiled upward in impossible geometry, their foundations anchored in paradox. Staircases bent into spirals that led both upward and inward. Walls made of liquid fire cast reflections that moved independently of their sources. Labyrinthine halls stretched into dimensions that did not obey mortal spatial logic. Knowledge, written in shifting runes, flickered through the air like insects of light. Every corridor pulsed with schemes that transcended comprehension. This was the realm of Tzeentch, the architect of fate, the eternal schemer, the whisperer of change. 1,000 eyes opened across the labyrinth's walls. 1,000 mouths formed in its shifting architecture. Whispers threaded through the air, some prophetic, some deceptive, all interwoven with an intelligence that had spent eons weaving plots across galaxies. At the center of the vast maze, a figure emerged, not singular, but manifold, sometimes avian, sometimes serpentine, sometimes humanoid, sometimes nothing a mortal language could describe. Wings of shimmering flame unfurled, feathers of crystalline sigils drifted through the air. His staff, carved from the concept of possibility, twisted in a continuous dance of transformation. The tribunal faced not one form, but 1,000 overlapping masks. Tzeentch spoke all at once and individually, a chorus of truths, lies, questions, and commands fused into a single harmonic cacophony. Judge me, judge change, judge fate itself. The voices overlapped like ripples in a disturbed pond. Futility, for judgment requires certainty, and certainty dissolves in my grasp. The tribunal approached without hesitation. Tzeentch recoiled, not in fear, but in anticipation, wings spreading with sudden delight. Do you see? Tzeentch crooned. Every decision shapes destiny. Every desire alters possibility. Without me, the galaxy stagnates. Without me, no hero rises, no empire falls, no hidden truth emerges from shadow. I am the whisper that sparks rebellion. I am the lie that reveals truth. I am the question that transcends the answer. With a sweep of his staff, the labyrinth convulsed. Visions exploded around the tribunal, billions of futures unfolding in cascading waves. A galaxy where humanity triumphed in golden unity. A galaxy reduced to cinders by tyrannid consumption. A galaxy reshaped by Eldari prophecy. A galaxy enslaved by the Necron's return. A galaxy drowned in chaos. A galaxy purged into sterile silence. Futures overlapped, collided, rewrote themselves. Tzeentch danced through them, talons tracing paths through possibility. You see, little judge, there is no balance to maintain, only motion, only transformation, only the endless cycle of hope and despair that births meaning. The tribunal's triune faces registered the visions without being consumed by them. His presence remained perfectly steady, a point of absolute law amid a storm of fluid truths. He reached into the kaleidoscope of futures, sifting through them not to choose one, but to understand the architecture behind them. Tzeentch hesitated as he realized what the tribunal sought, not the outcomes, but the pattern beneath the outcomes. The god's ever-shifting form rippled with tension. The tribunal saw it, the center of the labyrinth, the core of Tzeentch's essence, changed not for survival, but for domination. Hope manipulated into dependence. Destiny rewritten to feed the endless hunger for control. Mortals dreaming of a better future, only to be twisted by the very force that promised liberation. Every prophecy, every revolution, every moment of revelation had been engineered, not to uplift, but to perpetuate the architect's labyrinth. Tzeentch sensed the intrusion instantly. Stop, he hissed, and his 1,000 voices echoed with sudden alarm. You overreach. You cannot comprehend my entirety. The tribunal did not waver. Law met possibility. Certainty confronted manipulation. Tzeentch lashed out. The labyrinth exploded into fractal storms, its walls transforming into torrents of arcane energy. Sigils of burning prophecy spiraled around the tribunal, seeking to entrap him within an infinite puzzle. Illusions crafted from the deepest fears and greatest desires of all sentient species assaulted him from every direction. But the tribunal remained immovable. He reached out, not physically, but through the metaphysical lattice of this realm. and seized the central thread of Tzeentch's dominion, the cycle of manipulated change. The illusions shattered. The labyrinth convulsed. Tzeentch shrieked, his form unraveling into a storm of feathers, flame, and fractured intentions. "You cannot judge me," he cried, fragments of his presence scattering like shards of unrealized futures. "I am every path. I am every choice. I am every dream of what might be." The Tribunal's radiance deepened, pressing through the chaos until it reached the heart of Tzeentch's truth. Change, when twisted into chains, becomes tyranny. The warp quaked. The labyrinth collapsed inward, its walls folding like dying stars. Tzeentch's form reassembled, trembling, not from fear, but from something far worse to him: comprehension. His schemes, infinite as they were, had encountered an entity that could neither be misled nor entangled. "You see too clearly," he whispered, voice quiet for the first time. The Tribunal stepped past him, leaving only the echo of his verdict in the trembling air. Judgment moves beyond change. Another realm awaited, a place where torment and rapture merged into a single eternal scream. The collapse of Tzeentch's labyrinth faded behind the Tribunal, like the dying echo of a question finally answered. The warp, stripped of illusion in his wake, recoiled into raw turbulence. Its currents twisted and screamed, folding inward as though attempting to hide what lay ahead: the final dominion of the fourth god. A realm that even demons approached with reverence, terror, and trembling awe. A realm born from the deepest vulnerabilities of mortal consciousness, where pleasure and torment blurred into indistinguishable unity. The Tribunal pressed onward. The air changed first. It grew warmer, shimmering with fragrant haze that stirred memory, longing, hunger. Threads of sound drifted through the space. Soft sighs, broken gasps, melodies composed of both rapture and pain, indistinguishable yet intimately intertwined. Colors bled through the darkness in hues too vivid for mortal senses. Gold so bright it bordered on madness, violet so deep it swallowed thought, pinks that pulsed with the rhythm of a beating heart. Light rippled like silk brushing bare skin. Shadows quivered with anticipation. Every sensation, scent, sound, sight, tugged at the mind, inviting surrender. The warp shifted into the palace of Slaanesh. Endless avenues of obsidian marble stretched beneath veils of shimmering mist. Spires of sculpted flesh rose like monuments to desire twisted beyond sanity. Choirs drifted on unseen currents, their voices trembling between ecstasy and agony. Mirrors lined every path, each reflecting not the traveller, but temptations drawn from the soul's most forbidden corners. Some mirrors showed beauty perfected into cruelty. Others reflected triumph, glory, escape, or the fulfillment of long-denied yearning. None reflected truth. At the heart of this realm, atop a throne carved from the union of suffering and bliss, lounged Slaanesh. Their form shifted with each blink, sometimes lithe, sometimes colossal, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes neither or both. Skin shimmered in impossible hues, each movement rippling with sensual grace. Eyes of molten desire opened and closed like blooming petals, devouring every detail of the Tribunal. Their presence radiated seduction so intoxicating that even the warp trembled beneath it. Slaanesh smiled. "You arrive without fear," they murmured, voice soft as silk and sharp as a blade sliding between ribs. "How refreshing. Most who step into my realm fall to their knees before drawing breath." They leaned forward, fingers tracing idle patterns in the air. "Will you kneel, little arbiter? Or are you too proud for surrender?" The Tribunal did not kneel, Pride had no place in him. Emotion had no place in him. He advanced, and with each step the air around him clarified, stripping the shimmering illusions of their power. The mist parted. The mirrors cracked. The whispered temptations grew breathless, confused. Slaanesh's smile deepened, curiosity gleaming beneath layers of amusement. Unmoved, they whispered. Impossible. All beings desire, even gods, even concepts. Their voice slid into a low, intoxicating hum. Tell me then, what is it you want? The Tribunal's radiance remained unchanged. His silence carried a truth this realm rarely encountered. Desire could not sway law. Slaanesh rose with liquid grace, circling him, their presence wrapping around him like warm smoke. Where they stepped, the marble floor reshaped into flowing fabrics embroidered with scenes of indulgence. Where they breathed, the air thickened with perfume crafted from mortal dreams. You judge war, they whispered in one ear. You judge decay, they murmured in the other. You judge destiny, they breathed into the space before him. And now you come to judge perfection. A wave of psychic resonance swept outward from them, reshaping the palace in a single breath. The spires melted into sculptures of exquisite torment, figures carved from pain so profound it circled back into pleasure. The ground pulsed beneath the tribunal like a living heartbeat. Choirs of demons shifted into formation, their voices rising into harmonies woven from longing. Every motion, every sound, every color became a weapon designed to break will itself. The tribunal's light intensified. Slaanesh recoiled as their realm dimmed beneath that radiance, the seductive haze flattening into clarity sharper than any blade. The illusions faltered. The whispered promises dissolved. The mirrors shattered entirely, revealing only darkness behind them. Enough. Slaanesh's voice cracked, losing its velvet luster. This is sacrilege. This is rejection. The tribunal pressed deeper into the palace, and in doing so, he laid bare the core of Slaanesh's rule. He saw the first moment of their birth, the dying scream of the Eldari Empire collapsing under the weight of its own excess. He saw the millions of souls ripped into the warp in an instant, their collective ecstasy and agony fusing into a god that embodied both. He saw the centuries since, in which Slaanesh carved desire into chains, transforming mortal longing into addiction. Those who sought beauty became slaves to perfection. Those who sought escape were consumed by illusion. Those who sought love found only torment sharpened into obsession. Every desire, every hunger, every yearning fed the throne. Every mortal who dared dream risked being devoured. The tribunal understood. Desire, once a spark of growth, had become a prison. Slaanesh felt the intrusion into their essence and lashed out. Their form elongated into a monstrous silhouette of claws and fanged mouths, each one whispering promises laced with venom. A storm of psychic lashes struck the tribunal, each one forged from the deepest desires of every soul in the galaxy: power, beauty, vengeance, peace, oblivion. A mortal mind would have shattered under their weight. The tribunal stood unbroken. His presence dissolved the lashes on contact, reducing each temptation to meaningless mist. Slaanesh staggered, shimmering between forms, their confidence evaporating into desperation. "Do not judge me," they hissed. "I give them joy. I give them dreams. I give them what they cannot admit they crave. Your gifts consume them." The tribunal's verdict reverberated through the palace. Your beauty blinds them. Your pleasure chains them. Your dreams devour them. The palace cracked. Slaanesh fell to one knee, their body flickering between dozens of forms, each a mask of denial, anger, sorrow, and fractured longing. The warp itself wailed as the truth struck deeper than any blade. You cannot take desire from the universe, Slaanesh whispered, voice trembling. Without me, what remains? Desire without enslavement, hope without corruption, longing without the jaws of torment. The tribunal turned away, his light dimming the palace into ash-colored dusk. Behind him, Slaanesh trembled at the realization that they had not been destroyed, but they had been seen. Judgment moved onward, and the warp itself braced for the final reckoning yet to come. The tribunal departed the realm of Slaanesh as a fading gleam, leaving behind a palace collapsing under the weight of truth. The warp, wounded by 4 judgments, churned with uneasy silence. Its storms no longer roared with confidence. Its tides no longer surged with arrogant strength. For the first time in its existence, the warp felt the certainty of an authority beyond its gods. And as the tribunal rose from its depths toward the Imperium, the veil between realms trembled like fabric stretched to its final thread. He emerged above terror once more, not in dissent, not in fury, but in absolute stillness, like a single thought manifesting across the skies. The planet responded instantly. Storms ceased mid-thunder. The winds froze. Even light hesitated as his radiance spread across the upper atmosphere. The great dome of the palace flickered with the reflection of his triune form, casting shadows that reached across continents. Below, terror convulsed with fear. Vox towers screamed with reverberations they couldn't translate. Choirs of sanctioned psykers fell into synchronized seizures as the tribunal's presence brushed their minds. Some collapsed weeping, some begged for mercy, some stared in blank awe, their sanity washed away by the enormity of the moment. This time the tribunal did not look toward the emperor. He looked at everything else. The Imperium of Man had made itself a fortress, immense, unyielding, brutal. It was a civilization forged on the bones of billions, shaped by 10,000 years of desperation. Cathedrals the size of mountains stretched across continents, their spires weeping rusted incense and centuries of prayers. Hives rose like wounds upon the earth, swarming with billions living lives of misery, their souls dimmed beneath the weight of oppression. Orbiting shipyards bristled with warships built for conflict without end. Factories throbbed like diseased hearts, pounding out weapons that existed only to prolong a war humanity could never win. Weakness was heresy. Doubt was treason. Hope was a luxury denied. The tribunal swept through these truths with the clarity of a blade cutting silk. He saw the faithful, men and women kneeling in cathedrals lit by candles forged from human fat, whispering prayers to a god whose silence had lasted 10 millennia. They sought comfort. They found only doctrine sharper than chains. He saw the Inquisition, cold-eyed figures in black and gold vehicles executing entire populations on suspicion alone. They called it purification. They called it mercy. They called it order. In truth, it was fear disguised as authority. He saw the Astra Militarum, endless regiments marching into slaughter, their bodies stacked like sandbags against the tides of horror. They fought not for glory but because the alternative was annihilation. He saw the Adeptus Mechanicus, priests bound in metal and scripture, worshipping relics of forgotten ages, preserving technology they barely understood. Their devotion kept humanity alive. Their stagnation kept it chained. He saw the Astartes, legends carved into flesh and ceramite, heroes twisted into instruments of holy war, each one the pinnacle of mankind, yet each one a weapon forged for violence. He saw the High Lords, a council of the fearful, clinging to power while the galaxy burned around them. He saw the black ships, carrying psykers who screamed as they were fed into the throne. not as cruelty, but necessity. The tribunal saw it all. The Imperium was not evil, it was wounded. A wounded beast lashing out in terror, clinging to survival through brutality because nothing else remained. Every cruelty, every atrocity, every decree carved into the bones of its people had been born not from malice, but from desperation. Yet, desperation did not excuse imbalance. The tribunal descended, and the palace trembled as if the world's spine were cracking. Custodians assembled in formation, their halberds pointed upward in perfect unison, golden armor burning beneath the tribunal's light. Their discipline held, but their souls quivered under the weight of an attention that judged without bias, without mercy, without any concept of fear. He passed into the palace. No door opened, no barrier resisted. Walls, wards, and sanctums simply ceased to matter. The tribunal's presence phased through them in silence, brushing aside millennia of defenses crafted by humanity's greatest minds. He moved through grand hallways thrumming with the echoes of history, past statues of saints and heroes whose sacrifices had shaped an empire. The High Lords felt him before they saw him. Their council chambers erupted into chaos, some shouting prayers, some drawing weapons, some collapsing as visions of judgment clawed through their minds. When the tribunal materialized within the chamber, every voice died. Silence fell like a guillotine. The master of the administratum dropped to his knees, trembling so hard his voice shattered. "The emperor protects," he whispered. But the tribunal knew the truth. The emperor endured. The emperor sacrificed. But the emperor did not protect. He could not. Not anymore. One of the high inquisitors stepped forward, eyes blazing with fanatic conviction. "Identify yourself," he commanded, voice trembling but unbroken. "No being stands above the emperor. No entity may pass unchallenged in his realm." The tribunal regarded him as one might regard a candle confronting a star. He lifted a hand, not to strike, but to expose. He peeled back the inquisitor's memories, childhood rebellion crushed by doctrine, training drenched in fear, a lifetime convinced that humanity could survive only through purging, culling terror, a man who believed he saved humanity even as he strangled it. The tribunal released him. The inquisitor fell to his knees, gasping as if the air had been dragged from his lungs. The tribunal's verdict spread through the chamber in a wave of unbearable clarity. The Imperium was both humanity's shield and its prison, its savior and its executioner, its strength and its rot. It had preserved mankind for 10 millennia. It had condemned mankind to 10 millennia of suffering. The High Lords trembled under the weight of that truth, unable to speak. The tribunal lifted his gaze beyond the chamber walls, beyond terror, beyond the stars. Mankind had been judged, but judgment was not over. A greater reckoning awaited, a verdict that extended far beyond humanity, for the galaxy itself demanded to be seen. The tribunal rose from the imperial palace as effortlessly as a thought escaping a dream, leaving the High Lords collapsed in trembling silence. Terror fell away beneath him, shrinking into a bruised sphere of storms and spires, its surface still echoing with the weight of judgment. Yet the tribunal did not look back. His gaze expanded outward, sweeping across the great gyre of the galaxy. Humanity had been weighed, its virtues and horrors seen with perfect clarity. But the wound infecting this universe was far older, far wider, far deeper, and the tribunal would judge all of it. Space stretched before him like a tapestry woven from suffering. Countless stars pulsed with whispered agony, each surrounded by worlds scarred by violence. Warp storms flickered in violent spirals. Armies clashed on distant moons, and floating in the gulf between systems was the shadow of a truth few in the Imperium understood. Mankind was not alone in its damnation. The Tribunal's light extended across the stars, finding the first of the ancient races still fighting to survive the slow death of a galaxy on fire. He reached craftworld Eanden. Graceful, immense, formed from psychic artistry and living crystal, the craft world drifted like a splinter of a once glorious civilization. The Tribunal drifted through its corridors, moving unnoticed through halls engraved with runes of mourning. He saw wraithbone constructs towering like silent guardians, their forms housing the souls of fallen warriors. He saw spirit seers guiding the dead in battles no living Eldar could endure. He saw survivors walking with the weight of extinction on their shoulders, their eyes reflecting the grief of an empire destroyed by its own excess. The Tribunal looked deeper, past the sorrow into the truth beneath. The Elder had crafted their doom with their own decadence. Their arrogance had birthed Slanesh. Their collapse had torn a hole in the warp. Yet in the ruins of their downfall, they fought with dignity, seeking redemption through discipline and sacrifice. Their fate was tragedy. Their sin was history. Their future was fragile. The Tribunal withdrew. Next, he followed the currents of war toward a world drowning in brutal joy. He found the orcs in the midst of conflict, greenskins roaring with primal laughter as they crashed into a regiment of Astra Militarum. He hovered above the battlefield, observing the simplicity of their violence. To an orc, war was not horror. War was life. They fought not for conquest, nor survival, nor ambition, but because battle was woven into their very biology. Their existence was a cycle of growth, destruction, and rebirth, each conflict feeding the warp's insatiable appetite. They were not evil. They were inevitability given flesh, creatures born from a forgotten war in a forgotten age, engineered to fight without end. Balance had never been theirs to choose. Their nature was their prison. The Tribunal passed beyond them. Stars dimmed as he moved toward a region of silent void, colder than the graves of dead suns. A monolithic structure drifted there, a tomb ship of the Necrons. Its obsidian hull shimmered with eldritch energy, each glyph a testament to a civilization older than mankind's earliest atoms. The Tribunal entered its halls. Metallic warriors stood motionless, their emerald eyes dark and lifeless as they awaited the command to awaken. Above them hovered a Necron overlord draped in geometric finery, his mind a cold abyss of logic and ancient resentment. The Tribunal saw the truth etched into his fractured memories. A species once mortal, twisted into soulless immortality by the lies of the Citan. A people who had traded life for vengeance. A dominion built not upon malice, but upon the grief of a godless age. The Tribunal traced the scar of that decision through the ages. The Necrons did not hate. They did not crave. They sought only to reclaim what time and betrayal had stolen. Their sin was apathy toward all younger life. Their burden was eternity. The Tribunal moved on. His light dimmed as he neared the edge of the galaxy's outer void, where a shadow fed upon the dreams of evolution itself. There he found a world already lost, a planet stripped of oceans, forests, cities, and life, reduced to a desiccated husk. Floating above it, like a hunger-given form, was a splinter of a tyrannid hive fleet. The Tribunal drifted through its bioships, their walls pulsing with organic rhythm. Creatures scuttled through fleshy tunnels, their bodies grown for one task and one task alone: consumption. Endless consumption. The Tyranids knew no cruelty, no malice, no ambition. They were hunger perfected into a species. Their every action flowed from a singular directive whispered through the hive mind: survive at any cost. The Tribunal saw the truth. The Tyranids were not a mistake. They were not a corruption. They were the universe's oldest instinct, life-consuming life, magnified into cosmic scale. There was no evil to judge, only instinct, only design, yet instinct left unchecked consumed everything. He rose from the dissolving world and drifted further still, through the void between star systems. He found enclaves of tow expanding with hope blind to the abyss closing around them. He found Drukhari feasting upon agony to evade a fate worse than death. He found lesser species clinging to survival in the cracks left between empires, each one a fragment of the galaxy's broken mosaic, each one a symptom, not a cause. The Tribunal hovered in the center of the great spiral of stars, his light reflecting in the shattered souls of countless civilizations. The galaxy spun beneath him, ancient, wounded, staggering beneath 10,000 scars. The warp trembled at his presence. The materium throbbed with fear and anticipation. Even the Emperor felt his gaze settle upon every corner of mankind's domain. Balance demanded truth, and truth demanded clarity. The galaxy itself was not wicked, nor was it innocent. It was trapped in a cycle of violence, arrogance, fear, and hunger perpetuated by every faction seeking its own survival. Each species had carved the universe into a battlefield, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Yet necessity had become a prison, and the Tribunal saw the bars clearly. A verdict was forming, vast, unbearable, final. But before it could be rendered, a greater turmoil rippled across reality. The warp began to scream. The scream began as a vibration in the void, a trembling so faint that even the most sensitive psykers would have mistaken it for the echo of a distant star dying. But the Tribunal felt it instantly. It was not a sound, not truly, but the convulsion of a realm whose foundations had begun to buckle beneath an approaching truth. The warp shuddered like a creature sensing its predator for the first time. Its tides recoiled, its storms collapsed, its vast, roiling expanse quaked with a fear older than any memory contained within it. The Tribunal remained motionless in the gulf between stars, his triune form casting a calm radiance across the spinning arm of the galaxy. His judgment had reached its final stage. The sins of mankind, the burdens of Xenor's races, the chains forged by chaos, the wounds carved into reality itself. All of it had been weighed. All of it had been placed upon the scales. And for the first time since the dawn of creation, a verdict capable of reshaping a universe began to take form. That was when the warp screamed again. This time, the cry rippled through reality like a tidal wave, shredding the thin veil between realms. Demons flickered into existence on distant worlds, gibbering with voices choked by terror. Astropaths across the Imperium collapsed in unison, their minds overwhelmed by the rising storm. Warp routes twisted into knots of impossible geometry. The Astronomicon flickered, the Emperor's light dimming as though eclipsed by an expanding shadow. The four Chaos Gods stirred, not individually, not in isolation as they had for eons, but together, drawn into involuntary alignment by a force even they could no longer ignore. The Tribunal felt their domain shift, their boundaries collapsing inward as the gods recoiled toward a single point in the warp. He felt Khorne's fury twist into something perilously close to dread. He felt Nurgle's warmth shatter into rotting uncertainty. He felt Tzeentch's schemes unravel into panicked spirals of contradiction. He felt Slaanesh's hunger tighten into a trembling, fractured cry. They were retreating, not from battle, from judgment. The tribunal turned toward the veil as it split open like a wound, exposing the full immensity of the warp. He drifted toward it, his radiance slicing through layers of unreality until he crossed once more into the storm of madness. But this time, the warp trembled around him, not with defiance, but with a deep primal fear. The four gods materialized before him, not as illusions, not as avatars, but as their true cosmic forms, colossal presences forged from the raw essence of emotion. The sight would have annihilated mortal minds, but the tribunal saw them with perfect clarity. Khorne towered above. The others, his throne of skulls cracked from the strain of a fury he could not direct. His axe bled rivers of molten wrath, yet he did not raise it. Nurgle swelled like a diseased planet, his gardens withering behind him as his rotted hands trembled with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Tzeentch flickered between 1,000 impossible shapes, each one unraveling faster than he could remake it. His labyrinth had collapsed. His schemes had failed. Slaanesh knelt, trembling, their forms shivering between beauty and horror, unable to stabilize under the tribunal's gaze. The tribunal hovered before them, silent. The warp held its breath. Khorne broke first. "This judgment ends all war," he growled, voice splitting the storm into fragments. "If war ends, I end." The tribunal's light did not flicker. Nurgle's voice followed, thick with dread. "If decay does not spread, if suffering finds relief, my garden dies." Tzeentch's voices overlapped in cascading panic. "If fate settles into certainty, if possibility ceases, I am unmade." Slaanesh whispered, "If desire is freed, if longing is no longer a chain, I am nothing." Only then did the tribunal speak, not in words, but in meaning that cracked the foundation of the warp. "Balance requires that the suffering feeding you must cease." The warp convulsed violently. The gods staggered. Khorne roared, clawing at the void. "You destroy the cycle." Nurgle bellowed, "You unmake the fabric of life and death." Tzeentch hissed, "You freeze all change." Slaanesh cried out, "You sever every chain of desire." The tribunal's judgment deepened. "I do not end existence. I end your dominion over it." Silence. Pure, absolute silence. For the first time in the history of the warp, the gods had no answer. Then the combined weight of their terror broke the silence in a single cosmic howl that shook both realms. "You will unmake us," they shrieked, their voices blending into a single tortured cry. The tribunal's radiance intensified, illuminating the warp from within, revealing its every fracture, its every scar, its every whisper of madness. His presence pressed against the four gods, not with violence, but with a truth they could not defy. Your existence is sustained by imbalance. Your power is fed by despair. Your reign has chained this universe to unending torment. It ends. Now. The warp writhed as the gods braced for annihilation, their forms distorting under the crushing weight of inevitability. Storms tore themselves apart. Realms fractured. Legions of demons screamed as their patron deities felt the verdict closing around them. But the tribunal did not strike, not yet. The judgment was forming, but not delivered. The gods sensed it. Khorne's eyes burned. "You hesitate," Nurgle's voice gurgled. "You consider." Tzeentch whispered, "You are not certain." Slaanesh breathed, "You see a path you did not expect." And the tribunal stood still, for in the instant before he delivered his verdict, the warp surged with a counterforce. Not defiance, not rebellion, but a plea. A thread of existence that stretched beyond chaos, beyond despair, beyond mortality. A golden thread, a single will. The emperor of mankind had risen within the warp. The golden thread coalesced into a radiance so vast it outshone entire sectors of the galaxy. The Emperor's will flared across the warp, a tidal pulse of psychic might that forced even the four Chaos Gods to recoil. Khorne's crimson tide stuttered, Nurgle's gardens wilted, Tzeentch's labyrinth collapsed into jagged chaos, and Slaanesh's spires of pleasure and torment fractured under the brilliance. The Tribunal sensed it. This was no mere mortal intervention. It was the unshakable assertion of a god's authority, and it pressed into his judgment with the weight of purpose and defiance combined. The Chaos Gods, for the first time in aeons, acted not in unison against one another, but together against the force they could not comprehend. Khorne surged forward, his colossal axe swinging through the fabric of the warp, seeking to cleave both Tribunal and Emperor in a single blow. Nurgle's bulk exploded outward, vomiting waves of disease and decay designed to unmake all life in proximity. Tzeentch lashed with fractal storms of unmade probability, twisting time and space to snare the Tribunal. Slaanesh's screams wove themselves into a psychic assault of intoxicating desire and unbearable pain, intending to corrode resolve. Yet the Tribunal did not falter. His triune faces radiated pure judgment, each step through the psychic storm stabilizing the chaotic forces that sought to unravel him. He absorbed the attacks, passing every wave of violence, entropy, manipulation, and temptation with cold, unerring precision. Every assault he encountered was not merely physical or psychic. It was a reflection of the galaxy's imbalance, a manifestation of its endless suffering. The Emperor's presence flared in tandem, his psychic might interlaced with the Tribunal's law, binding Chaos's fury with threads of iron will and reason. It was a paradoxical dance. The Tribunal's perfect judgment measured the excesses, and the Emperor's indomitable will enforced the consequences. Together, they formed a nexus of order within the heart of the warp, a force neither god nor demon could fully counter. Khorne's fury collided with this nexus first. His axe carved through the air with the force of collapsing suns, striking with precision intended to sever reality itself. Yet each blow dissipated into golden light, neutralized and reflected back as the Tribunal's radiance reshaped its intent. Rage, weaponized for millennia, became impotent against unyielding law. The god of war's eyes flared with frustration, his fury feeding the Tribunal's understanding even as it consumed him. Nurgle struck next, his bloated form surging through the void, trailing rivers of rot and plague that threatened to dissolve existence itself. Entire clusters of psyker energy trembled beneath the onslaught. But the Tribunal's radiance contained the disease, purifying not by destruction, but by revelation, showing the god the truth of his own contradiction. Nurgle recoiled, his mirth decaying into uncertainty, as the Tribunal's judgment illuminated the inherent corruption in mercy, twisted to control. Tzeentch's labyrinthic manipulations followed. Every twist of probability, every fractal spell meant to bind, trap, and confuse dissolved under the Tribunal's clarity. The weave of futures collapsed into threads of absolute comprehension. Tzeentch screamed, his voice a chorus of broken schematics and unraveling destinies, realizing that no pattern could hide from a judgment that saw both cause and effect perfectly. Slaanesh attempted last, the siren god of ecstasy and torment striking with a lure so potent it could have shattered any mind. The Tribunal's presence acted as a mirror to her domain. Pleasure became understanding. Torment became insight. Each wave of desire exposed not delight, but the chains it imposed upon the galaxy. Slaanesh faltered, their voice breaking in disbelief. Realizing the tribunal perceived the suffering masked as rapture, the four gods, united in desperation, hurled themselves at the nexus of tribunal and emperor, a storm of pure chaos seeking to annihilate law incarnate. Reality itself trembled, tearing and reforming around the confluence. Stars splintered in distant galaxies. Psychic shrieks pierced the void. The very laws of cause and effect buckled as God clashed against concept. Mortality clashed against eternity. The warp became a battlefield where time, matter, and emotion were both weapons and casualties. Yet the tribunal advanced. Each step solidified fractured reality. Each motion reaffirmed judgment. The emperor, coalesced into a psychic golden tide, struck with unerring precision into the hearts of the four gods, amplifying the tribunal's verdict. Khorne staggered under the weight of clarity. Nurgle's domain convulsed. Tzeentch's schemes unraveled, and Slaanesh's illusions shattered. Their combined power, once untouchable, was exposed as imbalance, a wound demanding correction. The tribunal extended his triune aspect toward the gods, not in anger, but in the unyielding certainty of law. In that instant, all four trembled. They felt the weight of every mortal life, every suffering, every consequence magnified through eons of chaos. For the first time, they recognized themselves not as gods commanding obedience, but as elements of disorder feeding on the galaxy's pain. Their dominion was measured, their influence exposed, their excesses held accountable. Khorne roared, but it was hollow. Nurgle's laughter gurgled and broke. Tzeentch's scheming became frantic, fragmented, desperate. Slaanesh's cries faltered into silence. The tribunal's verdict loomed, absolute and inescapable. The galaxy itself seemed to pause, awaiting the final adjudication that would determine whether chaos would persist unchallenged or be bound beneath the weight of law. The convergence of tribunal and emperor created a brilliance so profound that even the four gods felt their essences bend. It was not destruction. It was comprehension. It was correction. Balance would be restored, not by obliteration, but by the undeniable assertion of order and consequence over unending tyranny. The gods could scream, struggle, or resist, but the scales had been set. Their dominion had ended. And in that void between realities, for the first time in 1,000,000 millennia, the galaxy exhaled. For the first time in 10,000 years, the silence that had shrouded terror was broken. Not by mortals, not by clergy, not by the endless chant of psykers, but by a voice that had slept behind the golden throne, steady, unyielding, and ancient beyond reckoning. The Emperor of mankind spoke, not in the trembling whispers of a dying soul, but as a radiant wave that reverberated through the warp, through the materium, and through the very judgments of the living tribunal. It was a voice that carried the weight of an empire, the sorrow of millennia, and the authority of divinity manifest. The tribunal, still hovering in the torn and trembling warp, perceived it not as sound, but as intent. A will coalesced into clarity, cutting through the chaos of gods and realities alike. The four chaos gods froze in disbelief, their attention drawn not to the tribunal for the first time, but to the emperor, whose essence now flowed outward like golden rivers through the psychic tides. The galaxy itself seemed to bend toward him, acknowledging a singular authority even greater than that of the cosmic arbiter. "Enough," the emperor intoned, his thought reaching across the stars. It was neither anger nor threat. It was command. Every echo of suffering, every scream, every pulse of chaos quivered under the weight of it. The scales have been observed. The sins, the suffering, the twisted balance of the galaxy, all have been seen. Yet judgment without understanding is void, An understanding without mercy is tyranny. The tribunal observed, measuring the will that had endured through impossible sacrifice. A power that had guided billions, restrained legions, and sacrificed its own flesh, mind, and freedom to maintain a fragile balance within an unraveling galaxy. The Emperor's intent was clear: to bind the universe not through fear, nor through destruction, nor through blind law, but through reasoned authority, tempered by comprehension of every variable he had forged and observed. The Chaos Gods recoiled as the Emperor projected his essence toward the tribunal, a light threaded with both command and appeal. Khorne's roar faltered. Nurgle's laughter curdled into something unrecognizable. Tzeentch's shifting forms wavered, losing coherence. Slaanesch's beauty faltered, revealing the raw terror beneath. They were confronted not merely by judgment, but by authority that comprehended all, the sins, the failures, and the consequences, yet chose restraint over annihilation. "You have passed through the galaxy," the Emperor continued, his psychic voice wrapping around the tribunal, around the Chaos Gods, around every sentient mind attuned to the warp. "You have weighed the actions of gods and mortals alike. You have measured the imbalance that has endured for eons. And yet the universe is not a mere sum of acts, nor a tally of failures and cruelties. It is potential. It is striving. It is life itself, in its most violent and flawed, yet indispensable form." The tribunal absorbed these words as he had absorbed truths of countless worlds, his triune gaze turning inward for comprehension. He sensed the weight of the Emperor's perspective: judgment tempered by foresight, restraint tempered by omniscience, authority tempered by empathy that transcended mortal experience. Here was a will equal in scope, not to dominate, but to sustain the fragile equilibrium of an impossibly wounded galaxy. "You may judge the acts of war, the corruption of gods, the suffering of mortals," the Emperor projected, each thought a wave that struck the warp like a tidal surge. Yet balance is not destruction. Order is not tyranny. And justice without vision is only chaos in another guise. The galaxy's fate must be measured not solely by scales, but by understanding, by preservation, by the choice to allow life, even fractured, even imperfect, to endure. The Chaos Gods recoiled further, sensing the tribunal's verdict falter under the weight of this supreme authority. Khorne's fury was redirected by a truth deeper than rage. Unending war could not survive a will that valued both restraint and inevitability. Nurgle's mercy twisted into contradiction, the decay he offered no longer pure because survival itself demanded correction. Tzeentch's schemes unraveled before futures that had already been observed, already measured, already tempered by foresight. Slaanesch's indulgence faltered, every pleasure and torment revealed as incomplete without the guidance of comprehension. The tribunal extended his perception once more, measuring the Emperor's intent not as a mortal or a god might, but as an arbiter of cosmic law. He understood now that judgment alone was insufficient. The galaxy required not a final verdict of punishment, but the infusion of reason, restraint, and preservation. The Emperor's will guided this judgment, offering an anchor against the unending chaos. "See, Tribunal," the Emperor projected, his light stretching across the realms. "The universe may be imperfect, and its denizens flawed, yet each has a role in the grand balance. To destroy or unmake is not always to enforce justice. Sometimes the greater act is to preserve, to correct, and to guide. You may judge, but even judgment must be tempered by understanding." The tribunal's light pulsed in acknowledgement. Where before his presence had been absolute in law, It now incorporated comprehension, restraint, and the weight of guided preservation. Khorne trembled in recognition of a balance he could not claim. Nurgle hesitated before mercy he could not dominate. Tzeentch staggered under futures he could not manipulate, and Slaanesh quivered at desires she could not bind. Each was held accountable, yet not destroyed, restrained yet recognized, a testament to a judgment augmented by understanding. The Tribunal turned his gaze once more outward, allowing the Emperor's guidance to weave through the galaxy. Worlds scarred by war, suffering, and neglect quivered beneath the psychic tide, each moment of life and death recorded, measured, and preserved. For the first time, the balance of the universe was neither cruelty nor chaos, but law tempered by comprehension, authority tempered by wisdom, judgment tempered by foresight. And in that moment, a new understanding emerged across the galaxy. The final reckoning had begun, not to annihilate, not to punish blindly, but to restore, to correct, and to preserve. The Emperor spoke again, softly, but with resonance that shook both reality and the warp. Let judgment be guided, let order endure, and let the galaxy, fractured and wounded though it may be, continue to strive. The Tribunal, acknowledging this supreme will, prepared to deliver the final verdict, a verdict tempered, measured, and in harmony with the greatest authority the universe had ever known. The Tribunal's radiance expanded across the galaxies like the slow dawn of a sun born from law itself. The four Chaos gods trembled before him, their power immense yet futile against the combined authority of cosmic judgment and the Emperor's indomitable will. Time and space quivered, reality itself bending beneath the weight of an adjudication that stretched beyond mortality, beyond divinity, beyond comprehension. Stars paused in their courses, planets shuddered in orbit, the warp itself recoiled, silent in anticipation. The moment had arrived. Judgment would be rendered, and its consequence would echo across every corner of the 41st millennium. The Tribunal turned his triune gaze upon the galaxy he had observed for countless cycles of war, despair, and defiance. He saw the Imperium, worlds scarred by devotion and cruelty, soldiers marching through endless battlefields, citizens living beneath unyielding doctrine, and priests and psykers sustaining a fragile order. He saw humanity's resilience and its brutality, its faith and its fanaticism, its hope and its despair. He saw the countless sacrifices, the crushed rebellions, the endless suffering, all measured against the will of survival and the stubborn insistence on existence itself. Then he looked upon the Xenos, the Eldar clinging to shattered craft worlds, their history written in excess and catastrophe, the Orcs reveling in unthinking violence, their joy inseparable from the wars they waged, the Necrons rising from tombs ancient and patient, enacting vengeance with cold, deliberate precision, the Tyranids consuming everything in their path, unstoppable and unfeeling, the universe itself their sustenance, and beyond these, the countless lesser species, scattered and struggling, caught in the gravitational pull of suffering imposed and inherited. Finally, he observed the four gods whose dominions had warped the galaxy: Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Slaanesh. They had been measured, weighed, and exposed. Their excesses, their contradictions, their unbridled influence across the ages, all laid bare. None could escape the clarity of judgment. None could hide behind the chaos they had wrought. The Tribunal raised his presence, not in attack, not in destruction, but in the final assertion of law and understanding. The warp convulsed beneath him, yet he did not break it. He harmonized it. Khorne's fury condensed into a single restrained focus. Nurgle's decay became a force tempered by necessity. Tzeentch's change was bound within the parameters of truth. Slaanesh's desires were illuminated, no longer able to blind or ensnare. Judgment did not annihilate. It corrected, redefined, and imposed balance upon what had long been ungoverned. The Emperor's golden will flowed alongside the Tribunal's radiance, guiding it, amplifying it, ensuring that the scales did not merely measure sin, but calibrated correction. Mortals, Xenos and gods alike felt the wave pass through them. For a heartbeat, or perhaps a millennium, everything paused. The galaxy, for all its horrors and triumphs, held its breath. Then the verdict was given. Humanity would endure, but its cruelty would be tempered. Its leaders would retain authority, yet be constrained by the unyielding laws of consequence. Worlds would still burn, battles would still rage, but survival would no longer demand unending oppression or blind fanaticism. Every act would carry its weight, and every excess would be exposed to the clarity of judgment. The Xenos would continue to exist, each according to their nature, yet bound within the parameters of survival that allowed the galaxy itself to persist. The Eldar would learn to preserve wisdom without descending wholly into decadence. The Orcs would fight, yet their wars would no longer threaten the cosmos's fundamental stability. The Necrons would act with purpose, tempered by awareness of consequence. The Tyranids would still consume, but the flow of life could no longer be erased entirely. A balance between predator and creation had been imposed. The four Chaos gods, stripped of unrestrained dominion, found themselves constrained in ways they had never experienced. Khorne's rage could no longer consume indiscriminately. Nurgle's mercy and decay were bound to cycles that would sustain life as well as end it. Tzeentch's manipulations would now encounter limits. Slaanesh's desires and temptations, though potent, could no longer enslave existence entirely. Their influence remained, yet it was no longer absolute. They could act, but only within the framework of universal equilibrium. The Tribunal's radiance slowly contracted, leaving clarity in its wake. Stars pulsed with renewed stability, the warp hummed with tempered energy, and the galaxy breathed with a balance it had never known. The Emperor's golden light retreated back to the throne, yet the awareness of his presence remained, a guiding pulse threading through every mind and soul capable of perception. And in that vast, silent aftermath, the Tribunal observed the outcome with unerring comprehension. Judgment had been delivered. The galaxy was preserved. Balance, fragile but unbroken, had been restored. The unending cycles of suffering and chaos had been corrected, constrained by law, understanding, and the greatest will the universe had ever known. The Chaos gods recoiled, defeated not by war, not by force, but by the immutable clarity of consequence. Mortals and Xenos alike would endure, not through the whims of chance or cruelty, but under the measured eyes of the Tribunal and the Emperor. Life, in all its violent, flawed, and extraordinary forms, would persist. The Tribunal, having fulfilled the final measure of judgment, receded from the galaxy's edge. His light dissipated into the cosmic void, leaving behind a universe forever altered. The four gods remained, weakened and humbled. Humanity would continue its endless struggle, tempered by newfound clarity. The Xenos would persist, each shaped subtly by the framework of balance. And the warp, once a tempest of unbound excess, now flowed with a disciplined rhythm, a reflection of the cosmic judgment rendered. The galaxy exhaled, and for the first time in its long, tormented history, the 41st millennium knew the faintest echo of peace.